Napoleon: A Life by Andrew Roberts. Picture this, a young guy, barely 25, fresh off the boat from a tiny rocky island. He's a political refugee who can barely speak the language without people smirking at his thick accent. No trust fund, no powerful uncle to make a phone call, nothing in his pocket but raw intelligence and a hunger that keeps him up at night. Fast forward just 6 years. That same outsider is now running the whole show, commanding one of the most powerful nations on the planet. He's rewriting the rulebook, reshaping society from the ground up, and leading armies to victories so spectacular that people start whispering comparisons to Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. This isn't some Hollywood fantasy. This actually happened. This is Napoleon Bonaparte. Since his death in 1821, more books have been written about him than there have been days that have passed. He's one of those towering figures in history, what one scholar called the Enlightenment on horseback. The man fought 60 battles and lost only a handful. But here's the thing. His real legacy, the one that still shapes your life today, wasn't just won with cannons and cavalry. It was crafted in conference rooms and courthouses. Think about the ideas we just accept as obvious now, that your talent should matter more than your last name, that everyone deserves equal treatment under the law, that people should be free to practice whatever religion they choose, that education should be based on merit, not privilege. Napoleon didn't invent all of these ideas, but he took them from theory to reality. He turned them into actual systems that worked. His legal code, the Napoleonic Code, is still the foundation of law in dozens of countries worldwide. Bridges he commissioned still carry traffic. Institutions he founded still operate. The author of this book, Andrew Roberts, didn't just spend years in dusty libraries piecing this story together. He actually walked 53 of Napoleon's 60 battlefields, from the scorching Egyptian desert to the frozen wasteland of Russia. This book is the fruit of that obsessive dedication, giving us a portrait that's both epic in scope and intimately human. So who really was this guy? Was he the revolutionary hero who saved France from tearing itself apart, or a power-hungry dictator who drowned Europe in blood? Was he a visionary who gave us the modern legal system, or a megalomaniac drunk on his own legend? Over the next hour, we're going on a journey through one of the most dramatic lives ever lived. We're not just going to rattle off battle names and dates like a history textbook. We're going to dig into what made this man tick. We'll uncover the secrets behind his magnetic leadership, explore the source of his relentless drive, and examine the fatal flaws that eventually brought him crashing down. By the end, you'll not only understand why Napoleon remains one of the most fascinating figures who ever lived, but you'll also gain insights into the nature of power, ambition, and how one person really can change the world, for better and for worse. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a masterclass in what happens when someone truly seizes their moment in history. Our story doesn't begin in the marble halls of Paris, but on a sun-baked, rugged island in the Mediterranean, Corsica. Napoleon Bonaparte entered the world in Ajaccio in 1769, born into minor nobility on an island famous for fierce family loyalties and an even fiercer independent streak. His family was respectable, but definitely not rolling in money. They were part of the local gentry, nothing more. Young Napoleon grew up intensely proud of his homeland, an island that had just been sold to France by the Italian city-state of Genoa right before he was born. His father, Carlo, was a handsome, educated lawyer who'd once backed the Corsican nationalist leader Pasquale Paoli. But when the French crushed the Corsican resistance, Carlo made a practical choice. He pledged loyalty to King Louis XV of France. Some saw him as a sellout, But this decision opened doors for his kids. For Napoleon specifically, it was the ticket that changed everything. It got him a royal scholarship to military school in France, putting him on the path to becoming a French officer. At 9 years old, Napoleon left home for the mainland. He was an outsider in every possible way. At the military school of Brienne, the other kids mocked his thick Corsican accent, his weird name, and the fact that he was obviously poorer than the sons of French aristocrats. He was a lonely, proud kid who spent more time buried in books than playing with classmates. His real friends were Plutarch's heroes. He devoured biographies of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, seeing his own future reflected in their conquests. For Napoleon, history wasn't just something to memorize for tests. It was a blueprint for his own life. The French Revolution exploded in 1789, and for Napoleon, it was like winning the lottery. For an ambitious young officer without family connections, the revolution was a golden opportunity. It demolished the old system, where your bloodline determined your ceiling, and promised a new world where talent was the only thing that mattered. Napoleon, despite technically being a nobleman himself, embraced the revolution's ideals of equality and merit. He saw it as Corsica's chance for greater freedom, and his own chance to make history. He dove headfirst into the chaotic politics of his homeland, but his revolutionary zeal and lingering Corsican nationalism put him on a collision course with Paoli, his childhood hero who'd returned from exile. The clash was inevitable. Paoli represented the old guard, suspicious of the radical changes coming from Paris. Napoleon was all in on the new order, seeing France as the engine of progress. The breaking point came in 1793, when the entire Bonaparte family was declared enemies of Corsica and had to flee for their lives. They landed in Toulon as political refugees, essentially broke. Napoleon, now fully committed to his French identity, knew his future wasn't on some small island. It was on the grand stage of Europe. His big break came that same year at the Siege of Toulon. The city, a crucial naval base, had rebelled against the revolutionary government and invited the British fleet in for protection. The French army trying to retake it was a mess, led by an incompetent general who used to be a painter. Napoleon, just a 24-year-old artillery captain at the time, saw with crystal clarity what needed to happen. The key wasn't attacking the city walls directly. It was capturing the forts overlooking the harbor. From there, his cannons could rain hell down on the British ships, forcing them to either leave or get sunk. He worked like a man possessed, gathering artillery, drilling gunners, building gun positions, often while under enemy fire. He showed incredible personal courage, even taking an English bayonet to the thigh. His plan was brilliant, and it worked flawlessly. The forts fell, the British fleet had to evacuate, and Toulon surrendered. For his crucial role, Napoleon was promoted to brigadier general. He'd gone from nobody to war hero overnight. But it was in Italy in 1796 that the Napoleon legend really took off. Put in command of the ragged army of Italy, he found his troops in absolutely miserable shape. Unpaid, starving, with morale in the gutter. In a series of electrifying speeches, he promised them glory and plunder in the rich plains of northern Italy. "Soldiers," he told them, "you are naked and ill-fed. I will lead you into the most fertile plains in the world." What happened next was one of the most stunning campaigns in military history. Facing larger Austrian and Piedmontese armies, Napoleon moved with a speed that left his enemies completely confused. He used what's called the strategy of the central position, keeping his army between his two enemies and hitting one hard, then wheeling around to smash the other before they could combine forces. His victories came rapid fire, montanot, millesimo, digo. The most legendary moment of that campaign happened at the Bridge of Lodi. With Austrian cannons blasting away, he personally grabbed a battle flag and led his grenadiers in a charge across a narrow wooden bridge. It was an incredibly brave, some might say reckless, move, and it was after this battle that his soldiers, out of genuine affection and respect, gave him the nickname Le Petit Caporal, the Little Corporal. Napoleon later said that it was after Lodi that the, quote, first spark of high ambition ignited in him. He no longer saw himself as just another general following orders. He was a man of destiny, someone who could reshape the fate of nations. His Italian campaign was a masterclass in warfare, but it was also a crash course in politics. He set up, quote, sister republics, planting the first seeds of Italian nationalism, and he systematically looted Italy's artistic treasures, shipping masterpieces by Michelangelo, Titian, and Leonardo da Vinci back to Paris to fill the Louvre. He wasn't just conquering, he was creating, collecting, operating on a grand scale. It was also during this time that Napoleon fell head over heels in love. Her name was Josephine de Beauharnais, a beautiful, charming, well-connected widow 6 years older than him. She'd narrowly escaped the guillotine during the Terror, which had killed her first husband. Napoleon's letters to her from the campaign are almost painfully passionate, a mix of desperate longing and jealous insecurity. "I awake full of you," he wrote. "Your portrait and the memory of last night's intoxicating evening have left my senses no rest." Josephine, though, didn't exactly match his intensity, at least not initially. While he was winning battles, she was back in Paris, enjoying the attention of other men. When he discovered her infidelity, which he learned about while stuck in the Egyptian desert, it left a wound that never fully healed. Why Egypt, you might ask? After securing Italy and forcing Austria to make peace, Napoleon returned to Paris as a conquering hero. But the Directory, France's corrupt and unstable government, saw him as a potential threat. They needed him out of the political spotlight. The Egyptian expedition was born, a grand, romantic adventure that appealed to Napoleon's love of ancient history and his dream of walking in Alexander the Great's footsteps. It was also strategic, a way to threaten Britain's trade routes to India. He sailed in 1798 with not just an army, but also a small army of scholars, scientists, artists, engineers, who would produce the massive Description de l'Egypte, a work that would unlock ancient Egyptian mysteries for the modern world. The campaign kicked off with a spectacular victory at the Battle of the Pyramids, where his disciplined French infantry formations shattered the charge of the fearsome Mamluk cavalry. "Soldiers," he famously announced, "from the top of those pyramids, 40 centuries are watching you." But the Egyptian adventure quickly turned into a disaster. Just weeks after landing, Admiral Nelson destroyed his fleet at the Battle of the Nile, cutting him off from France completely. It was here, stranded in Egypt, that he received the crushing news about Josephine's affair. "I have a great deal of domestic sorrow," he wrote to his brother Joseph, "as now the veil has been completely lifted." He took a mistress, Pauline Fores, the wife of one of his officers. His soldiers nicknamed her Cleopatra. He invaded Syria, but his ambition hit a wall at the ancient city of Acre, where a determined defense, supported by the British Navy, handed him his first major defeat. He returned to Egypt, beat another Ottoman army at Abu Qir, and then, learning about political chaos back in France, he abandoned his army and made a risky secret voyage home. He returned to France not as a defeated general, but as the nation's savior. The Directory was collapsing under the weight of corruption and military losses, France was exhausted after a decade of revolution and war. The country was ready for someone to take charge. The moment arrived on November 9, 1799, the 18th Brumaire in the revolutionary calendar. In a chaotic and somewhat messy coup, Napoleon, with help from his brother Lucien and other conspirators, overthrew the Directory. He nearly got mobbed by angry politicians in the legislative chamber, but the bayonets of his grenadiers saved him. From the ashes of the revolution, a new government emerged, the Consulate, and at its head, as first consul, stood Napoleon Bonaparte. He was just 30 years old. "We have finished with the romance of the revolution," Napoleon told his council. "We must now begin its history." As first consul, he worked with almost superhuman energy. He was a master administrator who got involved in every detail of governing, from military grand strategy down to regulations for the National Theatre. His greatest and most lasting achievement was the Napoleonic Code, a single, unified system of laws that replaced the messy tangle of feudal and royal laws that had governed France for centuries. The Code enshrined the core principles of the Revolution: equality before the law, property rights, and religious tolerance. It was so well designed and clearly written that it spread across Europe and continues to influence legal systems worldwide. This is his real claim to immortality. He healed deep wounds from the Revolution by signing the Concordat with the Pope, bringing the Catholic Church back to France while keeping it firmly under state control. He stabilized the nation's finances, created the Bank of France, and established a system of state secondary schools, the lycées, to train the next generation of leaders. He was building a new France, a modern, centralized state on a rock-solid foundation. He also brought peace, at least temporarily. At the Battle of Marengo in 1800, he turned near defeat into victory against the Austrians, solidifying his power and again proving his military brilliance. The Peace of Amiens with Britain in 1802 brought a brief, welcome break from a decade of constant warfare. But peace couldn't hold. The old monarchies of Europe saw Napoleon as the living embodiment of the revolution, a dangerous upstart threatening their entire world order. And Napoleon, for his part, couldn't sit still. His ambition had no ceiling. In 1804, he took the ultimate step. In a magnificent ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral, with the Pope present, he crowned himself Emperor of the French. He'd restored monarchy, but a completely new kind, one based not on divine right, but on popular will expressed through votes, and on the power of his own genius. The year 1805 saw Napoleon at his absolute peak. Facing a third coalition of Austria, Russia, and Britain, he marched his Grand Armée from the English Channel to Central Europe with breathtaking speed. At the Battle of Austerlitz, on the first anniversary of his coronation, he won his most brilliant victory. In a tactical masterpiece, he baited the Austro-Russian army into a trap, smashing their center and inflicting a crushing defeat. "Soldiers," he proclaimed, "I am satisfied with you. You have decorated your eagles with immortal glory." The next year, he demolished the supposedly unbeatable Prussian army at the twin battles of Jena and Auerstadt. In 1807, after a brutal winter campaign in Poland, he beat the Russians again at Friedland. At Tilsit, on a raft floating in the middle of the Niemen River, he met Tsar Alexander I and forged an alliance that effectively carved up Europe between them. He was the master of the continent. His empire stretched from Spain to Poland. He placed his brothers and top generals on European thrones: Joseph in Naples, then Spain, Louis in Holland, Jerome in Westphalia, Murat in Naples. He created a new merit-based aristocracy through the Légion d'honneur, rewarding the talent and bravery of soldiers and citizens. He seemed absolutely unstoppable. But even at this moment of supreme power, the seeds of his destruction were already taking root. The first was what he'd later call the Spanish ulcer. In 1808, he made a catastrophic miscalculation. He kicked out the Spanish royal family and put his brother Joseph on the throne, expecting the Spanish people to welcome his modern reforms. Instead, he sparked a firestorm of popular resistance. The Spanish rose up in a brutal guerrilla war, a war to the knife, aided by a British army commanded by a general who would become Napoleon's ultimate nemesis, the Duke of Wellington. The Spanish War would bleed France of men and money for years, a festering wound that never healed. The second seed of destruction was his own creation, the continental system. In an attempt to wage economic war against his last remaining enemy, Great Britain, he banned all of Europe from trading with her. It was an ambitious plan, but completely impossible to enforce. Smuggling was everywhere, and the system backfired spectacularly, damaging the economies of his own allies and breeding resentment against French domination. His obsession with enforcing this system would eventually lead him to make his most fatal mistake. By 1810, his personal life also reached a crisis point. Desperate for an heir to secure his dynasty, and with Josephine now in her mid-40s and unable to give him children, he made the agonizing decision to divorce her. "Do not doubt my love," he told her, "but it is a victory I must win for the future of France." He then married Archduchess Marie-Louise of Austria, daughter of his old enemy Emperor Francis. She was young, she was a Habsburg princess, and in 1811 she gave him what he wanted most, a son, Napoleon II, the King of Rome. His dynasty seemed secure. His empire had reached its greatest extent. But his relationship with his most important ally, Tsar Alexander, was breaking down. The Tsar was suffering under the economic hardship of the continental system and growing wary of Napoleon's designs on Poland. Napoleon saw Russia's defiance as a threat to his entire imperial structure. He believed he had to make an example of them. In the summer of 1812, he assembled the largest European army ever seen, the Grande Armée of over 500,000 men, drawn from 20 different nations, and marched on Russia. It was an army of unprecedented scale, and it was a gamble of epic proportions. "I will strike one great blow," he believed, "and it will all be over." But the Russians refused to play by his rules. Instead of standing and fighting the decisive battle Napoleon wanted, they retreated, deeper and deeper into the vastness of Russia, drawing him ever further from his supply lines. They adopted a scorched earth policy, burning their own villages and crops, leaving nothing for the invaders. The Grande Armée, which had always lived off the land it conquered, began to starve. Disease, especially typhus, tore through its ranks. Napoleon finally got his big battle at Borodino, just outside Moscow. It was an absolute bloodbath, the single deadliest day of the entire Napoleonic Wars. The French won the field, but the Russian army wasn't destroyed. A week later, Napoleon entered Moscow, expecting the Tsar to negotiate peace. Instead, he found an abandoned city, which the Russians then set on fire. He waited in the smoldering ruins for 5 weeks for a peace offer that never came. Finally, with winter approaching, he was forced to begin the long retreat home. What followed was a catastrophe of unimaginable horror. The brutal Russian winter, which arrived early and hit hard, combined with starvation and relentless attacks from Cossack raiders, utterly destroyed the Grande Armée. Of the more than 500,000 men who had invaded, fewer than 100,000 stumbled back across the Niemen River. The spell of Napoleon's invincibility was shattered. Europe sensed its opportunity. Prussia, then Austria, joined Russia and Britain in a new Sixth Coalition. In October 1813, at the massive Battle of the Nations at Leipzig, Napoleon was decisively defeated in a three-day slugfest by the combined Allied armies. He was forced to retreat back to France. In the spring of 1814, with France invaded from all directions, Napoleon fought one of his most brilliant campaigns, a whirlwind series of victories against vastly superior numbers. But it was too little, too late. His own generals, exhausted by endless war, turned against him. Betrayed and abandoned, he was forced to abdicate. He was exiled to the small island of Elba off the Italian coast, given as his own tiny kingdom. The old monarchies were restored across Europe, and the world breathed a collective sigh of relief, thinking the age of Napoleon was finally over. They were wrong. Less than a year later, in March 1815, he escaped. He landed in France with 1,000 men and began a march on Paris that's become the stuff of legend. The soldiers sent to arrest him threw down their weapons and joined him instead. His old marshal, Ney, who'd promised the restored Bourbon king he'd bring Napoleon back in an iron cage, defected with his entire army. Without firing a single shot, Napoleon walked back into the Tuileries Palace and was once again Emperor of the French. It was a glorious, romantic comeback, but it was doomed from the start. Europe would not tolerate his return. The Allies declared him an outlaw and mobilized their armies once more. The final act played out on a small stretch of Belgian farmland on June 18, 1815, the battlefield of Waterloo. Facing an Anglo-Dutch army under Wellington and a Prussian army under Blücher, Napoleon fought his last battle. It was incredibly close, a titanic struggle that hung in the balance for hours. But in the end, the stubborn defense of the British infantry and the timely arrival of the Prussians turned the tide. The Imperial Guard, his elite final reserve, broke and fled. The Grande Armée was routed. His political life was finished. He fled to the coast and this time surrendered to the British. They weren't taking any more chances. He was exiled to Saint Helena, a remote, windswept rock in the middle of the South Atlantic, thousands of miles from anywhere. There, guarded by British soldiers, he spent his final 6 years fighting his last campaign, a war of words, dictating his memoirs, carefully crafting his legend for future generations. He died on May 5, 1821, at the age of 51, probably from stomach cancer, the same disease that had killed his father. So what do we make of this extraordinary life? Napoleon Bonaparte was a man of deep contradictions. He was a child of the Revolution who became an emperor, a liberator who became a conqueror, a man who brought both enlightenment and devastating war to Europe. His legacy is as complex and debated as the man himself. In France, he's remembered as a national hero, the founder of modern France. In much of the rest of Europe, he's remembered as a tyrant who unleashed 2 decades of bloodshed. Both perspectives hold truth. Perhaps the most powerful lesson from Napoleon's life is about the nature of ambition. His rise demonstrates that talent, energy, and iron will can overcome almost any obstacle. He was a master at seizing opportunities, someone who saw chaos not as a threat, but as a ladder to climb. For anyone starting out in life, his relentless work ethic, his deep study of his craft, and his unshakable self-belief offer powerful inspiration. He proves that we're not merely products of our circumstances. We have the power to reshape them. But his fall is a cautionary tale. It shows that unchecked ambition, believing in your own infallibility, and contempt for the limits of power can lead to catastrophic ruin. He conquered an empire, but couldn't conquer his own hunger for more. He won nearly every battle but lost the final war because he couldn't imagine a world that didn't revolve around his own glory. He reminds us that the greatest victories are often not over others, but over ourselves. So what can you, someone at the beginning of your own life's journey, take from his story? First, the power of knowledge. Napoleon wasn't just a soldier. He was a voracious reader who passionately studied history, law, and science. His victories were won not just with weapons, but with ideas. He understood that to lead, you must first learn. So read widely. Study the great lives that came before you. See history not as boring facts to memorize, but as a source of wisdom and a guide to action. Second, the importance of action. Napoleon was never passive. He was a man of incredible energy who made decisions and moved fast. Don't wait for the perfect moment. It's never coming. Make your plan, but stay ready to adapt. Seize the opportunities that come your way and create your own when they don't. But finally, and most importantly, the necessity of humility. Napoleon's story powerfully reminds us that pride comes before the fall. Listen to others, especially those who disagree with you. Understand your own limitations. Know when to stop. True strength isn't about never failing. It's about having the wisdom to know when you've gone too far, and the courage to change course. Napoleon Bonaparte's life was a grand, epic, and ultimately tragic drama. He reached for the stars, and for a time he actually held them. But in the end, he was consumed by the very fire that fueled his rise. His story is a timeless lesson in the heights a human being can reach, and the depths to which they can fall. It's a story that, once you truly understand it, you'll never forget. That was a summary of Napoleon: A Life by Andrew Roberts. We've covered the broad sweep of his incredible life today, but a summary is like viewing a mountain from a distance. The real adventure, the real understanding, comes when you climb it yourself. The magic of a great book lives in the small details, the quiet moments when a single sentence or forgotten story connects with you in ways you never expected. This overview is your map, helping you decide if this is a mountain worth climbing. If anything we've discussed today sparked your curiosity, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning history. It's an experience that can change how you think about leadership, ambition, and your own potential. A link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you found this journey into the life of a history maker valuable, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. That way, you won't miss our next exploration of another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's continue to learn and grow together.